I learned the hard way that money doesn't change people, it exposes them. When I unexpectedly inherited $33 million from my late sister, I was ecstatic to share the news with my son. On the way to his home, I crashed trapped, bleeding, and terrified. In the hospital, I waited for him, clinging to hope that family still mattered. But when I called, his response was ice cold. I don't have time for this. Weeks later, he appeared, not out of love, but curiosity about my condition. The moment his new wife saw my face, she screamed. My name is Henrietta Cole, I'm 68, and I've never believed wealth could divide a family, until the day it nearly killed me. For most of my life, I lived modestly, teaching music and caring for my aging sister, Margaret. When she passed, I expected grief, not fortune. But her attorney handed me a letter and documents announcing a $33 million inheritance, her life's savings, investments, and estates left entirely to me. The news was surreal. I thought immediately of my son, thinking this blessing might help repair the growing distance between us. I imagined joy, reconciliation, maybe even pride. I had no idea that money would reveal exactly what he valued, and what he didn't. The inheritance felt like a miracle wrapped in grief. Margaret had always been private about her finances, and I never imagined she'd accumulated such wealth. I spent hours with the attorney reviewing documents, trusts, accounts, and letters explaining her wishes. She left notes urging me to use the money for comfort, travel, and giving back. I immediately thought of my son, believing he'd be thrilled. We argued in the past about my financial struggles, and I hoped this would finally ease that tension. The attorney advised caution, reminding me wealth can attract greed, even within families. I dismissed the warning. I thought love outweighed money. I was wrong, excited and emotional. I decided not to call him. Instead, I would surprise him in person. I gathered the documents, placed them safely in a folder, and got in my car. As I drove, I rehearsed the conversation in my head, imagining his smile, his relief, his gratitude. I thought about paying off his debts, helping with his career, maybe even offering to buy a home for him and his new wife. I felt hopeful for the first time in months. The road stretched ahead like a promise. The weather was clear, and I had no reason to expect danger. But fate doesn't send warnings, it just arrived. A delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into my car, spinning it violently. The sound of metal crushing against metal drowned out my scream. Glass shattered, airbags deployed. My body was thrown against the seatbelt, pain shooting through my ribs and legs. I tasted blood, felt numbness creeping through my limbs. People yelled, sirens wailed, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. Paramedics arrived and carefully extracted me, bracing my neck and checking my breathing. The folder with the inheritance documents lay crumpled near the passenger side, my dreams scattered with it. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I wondered whether my son would rush to see me or if work would come first. In the hospital, time blurred. Surgeons worked on my fractured ribs and a dislocated hip. Nurses visited regularly, checking vitals and offering comfort. When I woke fully, I asked for my phone and tried calling my son. Once, twice, 10 times. Each attempt went to voicemail. Hours passed without a response. I texted him, explaining I'd been in an accident and needed him. No reply. Nurses reassured me he might be busy, but the silence grew heavier each day. I hoped he would walk through the door with concern in his eyes. Instead, I stared at an empty room, wondering if my importance had shrunk to nothing. When I finally reached him by phone, his tone was flat and irritated. I told him I'd been in a crash, that I was hurt, scared, and alone. His response chilled me. I don't have time for this kind of thing, handle it yourself. There was no shock, no questions, no sympathy, just annoyance. I tried to explain, but he cut me off, saying he had priorities, and hung up. The silence afterward felt worse than the pain in my ribs. In that moment, I realized something I'd never dared confront. Love without empathy is just a word, and I wasn't his priority. Wealth might be. Weeks passed. Doctors discharged me into rehabilitation, and I learned to walk with a cane. My body healed slowly, but my heart remained bruised. Not once did my son call or visit. I received flowers from neighbors, not him. Nurses asked if I had family to help with post-care, and I lied, saying they were busy. I faced physical therapy alone, nights filled with pain and reflection. I clung to the hope that when I recovered, I could try again, reach out, explain, reconnect. I didn't yet understand that he planned to return only when inheritance, not love, was at stake. It wasn't until weeks later, long after I'd been discharged, that my son finally appeared, not with concern but with curiosity. He walked into my small rehab apartment with an air of obligation rather than affection. Beside him stood his new wife, impeccably dressed with a tense smile that didn't touch her eyes. His greeting was dispassionate, stating he heard I survived rather than asking how I felt. He looked around the modest room with faint disappointment, perhaps expecting a more glamorous recovery given the inheritance rumors. His visit wasn't about reconciliation. It was reconnaissance. I realized quickly that he wasn't here for me. He was here for my money, but her reaction was different. The moment her eyes landed on my face, the color drained from hers. She froze, lips parted, and whispered, "Oh my God, she's my," before cutting herself off mid-sentence. Panic flashed in her expression, not sympathy but fear. She took a step back as if I were a ghost resurrected. My son looked at her, confused by her sudden change. I watched carefully, recognition. That was the emotion I saw. She knew me from somewhere, not from society circles, not from my son's stories, something deeper, something she wanted hidden. Her shock felt personal, not polite. And for the first time since the accident, I sensed the inheritance wasn't the only secret in the room. He wasted no time. Within minutes, he asked about Margaret's estate, pressing for details, where the money was, how soon it could be accessed, and whether the paperwork was finalized. I told him the funds were still in probate, and he frowned, clearly irritated. He pretended to be worried about protecting me but kept circling the same question: who else knew? His wife remained silent, still shaken, her eyes flicking between us like someone watching a bomb near detonation. His tone was transactional, clinical, devoid of familial warmth. For him, my recovery was just an obstacle to an inheritance timeline. It wasn't grief. It was impatience. Under the guise of responsibility, he suggested we update my medical power of attorney to name him instead of my longtime friend and neighbor Lillian. He argued it would streamline decisions in emergencies. But I knew the truth: he wanted control. Control of my health meant control of my wealth. He even produced pre-filled forms, something no loving son would bring casually. The timing was suspicious. His wife watched anxiously, shifting foot to foot, clearly aware the request was inappropriate. I refused politely. His expression hardened. The mask slipped. He didn't want to protect me. He wanted leverage. That was the moment I realized this wasn't neglect. It was a strategy. Frustrated, he finally stopped pretending. He said the inheritance could be life-changing and accused me of being unfair if I didn't share it responsibly. He implied it was my duty to secure his future. My accident, apparently, had inconvenienced his plans. He spoke as though wealth automatically belonged to him, as if I were merely a conduit, not an individual. His wife tried to intervene, asking him to stop under her breath, but he pressed on. It became painfully clear my survival wasn't a relief to him. It was a complication. The money mattered more than my life. The realization stung, but it also clarified everything. I shifted my attention to my wife. Her earlier reaction still bothered me. When I gently asked about her family, her posture stiffened. She spoke vaguely, mentioning distant relatives, a childhood abroad, and a strained relationship with her parents, but she avoided specifics. My son seemed oblivious to her panic, but I was. Her accent slipped when she was emotional. Her story felt rehearsed. She wasn't afraid of my money, she was afraid of me. Something about my name or past triggered her. Her distress wasn't greed, it was recognition. And that made her more dangerous or more sympathetic than my son. After they left, I couldn't shake the feeling I'd seen her before, or that she knew me beyond introductions. I pulled old photo albums, letters, and legal documents from storage, searching for connections. Adoption, estrangement, immigration, something about her reaction hinted at a secret involving my family or past. I contacted Margaret's lawyer again, asking for any correspondences or references in her estate papers. If my daughter-in-law recognized me, it wasn't a coincidence. And if my son married her without knowing her identity, then the inheritance wasn't the only truth threatening to surface. The past wasn't finished with me. When they returned the next day, I asked her directly, calm but firm, where she knew me from. Her composure cracked. Tears welled as she confessed that she recognized me from an old photograph she once found among her mother's belongings. Her mother, she explained, had spoken of a wealthy woman who took something precious decades ago. She believed that woman was me. The accusation stunned me. I had no memory of such an event, but her sincerity was undeniable. She wasn't just my daughter-in-law, she was connected to a chapter of my past I had never been told. The fear in her eyes wasn't greed, it was history resurfacing. We sat down together, and she produced worn paperwork, adoption documents, case numbers, and a faded photograph. The child in the picture resembled her as a teenager. The name listed on the paperwork matched Margaret's friend from decades ago. With trembling hands, I recognized the surname. My sister had once helped arrange a private adoption for a young woman in trouble, one she had sworn to keep confidential. The implications were overwhelming. My daughter-in-law might be that child. DNA tests were ordered, not to expose scandal, but to confirm the truth. As the testing swabs were sealed, we all realized this was bigger than inheritance. It was an identity. My son's reaction shifted from greed to horror. He realized he might have unknowingly married someone with a secret familial link, not incestuous, but legally and socially scandalous. The potential headline alone terrified him. His selfishness resurfaced as he fretted over reputation rather than the emotional turmoil unfolding around him. Instead of compassion, he panicked about disgrace. His wife trembled, caught between wanting answers and fearing the consequences. He blamed me for hiding things and Margaret for creating a mess. But the truth was simple. He cared only about how this affected him. The inheritance he coveted began to feel cursed rather than fortunate. As more details surfaced, the wife admitted another truth. She had married quickly partly for immigration security. Her visa was expiring, and the marriage offered stability. But when she learned about my inheritance, her motives shifted from survival to strategy. She was terrified I'd reject her if I learned her past. She feared deportation, not because she lacked love for my son, but because she lacked security. The inheritance became a lifeline she didn't fully intend to exploit, but my son did. Their motives diverged: his greed, her desperation. It didn't excuse deceit, but it explained fear. The crash had exposed more than fractures, it exposed intent. During one tense argument in my rehab room, voices escalated. A nurse passing by overheard enough to alert administration. A social worker and patient advocate intervened, ensuring I wasn't being pressured, coerced, or manipulated while recovering. They documented the interaction, valuable evidence for future legal proceedings. My son's demeanor turned hostile as he accused the staff of overstepping, but their involvement created accountability. I wasn't alone anymore. The staff recognized signs of emotional exploitation, and they weren't willing to let an elderly patient be taken advantage of. The spotlight shifted from private conflict to monitored behavior. Realizing his influence was slipping, my son attempted a desperate move, filing for temporary guardianship over my medical and financial decisions. He claimed I was mentally compromised from the crash and vulnerable to manipulation. He presented selective texts and exaggerated accounts to paint himself as a caring son, but his timing exposed him. The judge questioned why guardianship was only sought after learning of my inheritance. Hospital evaluations confirmed I was mentally sound. His petition was denied, and suspicion fell on him instead. He hadn't just lost control, he'd lost credibility. Once discharged from rehab, I contacted my estate attorney, the same one who handled Margaret's affairs. I explained everything: the inheritance, the crash, my son's neglect, the wife's panic, and the emerging adoption connection. He advised caution and documentation. We discussed restructuring my estate to protect it from coercion. I initiated steps to ensure no one, not even my son, could access the funds without oversight. More importantly, I sought answers about the adoption. If the wife was unknowingly tied to my family's past, she deserved truth, not shame. Money had triggered this mess. Now, truth would guide the next steps. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. My son's attorney tried to frame him as a devoted child who only sought guardianship out of concern. But the hospital records, recorded phone calls, and testimonies from nurses painted a different picture: coercion, neglect, and opportunistic timing. The judge reviewed documents showing he attempted to alter medical authority immediately after learning about the inheritance. His own text messages, demanding updates about probate rather than my health, became damning evidence. The wife, trembling, admitted parts of the truth under oath. The hearing didn't just deny his petition, it officially documented his intent to exploit my condition for financial gain. The mask of concerned son shattered in public record. Following the hearing, my attorney filed motions to remove my son as a potential beneficiary pending further investigation. The court agreed, issuing a temporary injunction preventing him from making claims, contesting documents, or accessing any accounts tied to the inheritance. He was furious, insisting it was unfair and accusing me of manipulation. But the judge stated plainly, inheritance is a privilege, not an entitlement. His behavior demonstrated neither respect nor care. The revocation wasn't permanent yet, but it was a clear warning. For the first time, he realized his greed wouldn't be rewarded. His dream of instant wealth began slipping through his fingers, and panic replaced arrogance. Next came the immigration inquiry. The courtroom testimony revealed she entered the marriage partly for residency security, and officials initiated a review. Investigators examined her visa history, employment records, and the suspicious timing of her marriage. She wasn't immediately deported, but the threat was real. Unlike my son, she didn't lash out. She cried, terrified of losing the life she had built. Her motive, while flawed, had been survival rather than greed. The inquiry forced her to confront consequences she never anticipated. For the first time, she directed her fear not at me, but at my son, recognizing his selfishness had worsened her situation instead of protecting her. News spread quickly. Local media picked up the story: a wealthy woman surviving a crash, an inheritance conflict, and a son accused of exploitation. Headlines framed him as heartless, his wife as mysterious, and the courtroom hearing as a spectacle. Their neighbors whispered. Friends distanced themselves. Social circles that once praised my son's ambition now criticized his entitlement. Job offers vanished. Invitations disappeared. The stigma wasn't fabricated, it was earned. Reputation, once inflated by social charm, deflated under scrutiny. Meanwhile, I received letters from strangers, some pitying, others supportive. The scandal didn't make me proud, but it made one thing clear. Masks fall when money rises. The fallout didn't stop socially, it hit financially. Investors learned about the court injunction and froze funding. Business partners questioned his ethics. Clients withdrew contracts, wary of associating with scandal. Employees resigned to avoid instability. His startup, once his pride, crumbled under pressure. He blamed me publicly, calling the situation overblown, but documents and behavior spoke louder. In desperation, he attempted a PR campaign, portraying himself as misunderstood, but evidence contradicted his narrative. The collapse wasn't caused by my inheritance. It was caused by his own actions. His empire wasn't destroyed by me, it was exposed by him. The DNA results arrived, and the truth unfolded gently but irrevocably. She wasn't related to me by blood, but she was the daughter of the woman Margaret had helped decades ago. Her mother had blamed my family, believing Margaret abandoned her, when in reality she voluntarily relinquished her child to escape an abusive household. The misunderstanding had been passed down as resentment. When she married my son, she never expected our lives to intersect so closely. The revelation didn't excuse deceit, but it clarified origins. She wasn't my enemy. She was a product of silence and secrecy. And now she knew the truth. With truths uncovered and loyalties revealed, I decided the inheritance could no longer be allowed to fall into entitled hands. I met with my attorney to design a new structure, one that protected the funds and redirected them toward causes aligned with Margaret's wishes: education, caregiving, and community programs. My son would not inherit by default. My daughter-in-law, who was unraveling her own past, would not be punished, but she also wouldn't be rewarded for silence. The $33 million became less about wealth and more about purpose. The crash had nearly ended my life, but it gave me clarity. Legacy should be earned, not assumed. Because what happened after the courtroom wasn't revenge, it was reconstruction. Like asking you to subscribe, the final twist changes everything. In a final, decisive move, I transferred the $33 million into a charitable trust bearing Margaret's name. The beneficiaries were not relatives, but community causes she cherished: hospice care, emergency housing, and scholarships for single mothers. The trust was legally safeguarded from the contest. My son received official notice that he was no longer a direct or indirect beneficiary. His reaction was explosive: accusations, threats, pleas. But the papers were signed, notarized, and irreversible. The money that once tempted betrayal now became a force for compassion. In choosing charity over entitlement, I honored Margaret, protected my legacy, and ensured no manipulative hand could reach it again. To prevent future attempts at coercion, I appointed a neutral professional guardian, an experienced elder advocate, to hold my medical power of attorney. It wasn't a decision made out of bitterness, but prudence. This guardian had no stake in my wealth and no emotional leverage to exploit. My son attempted to challenge the appointment but failed. The court recognized his motives were financial, not protective. With this safeguard, I felt genuine relief. Illness or accidents would no longer be opportunities for manipulation. My autonomy and health were protected not by family obligation, but by legal foresight. For the first time since the crash, I felt safe. A court ruling followed, formalizing restrictions. Neither my son nor his wife could manage, request, or oversee any aspect of my finances. They were barred from acting as guardians, trustees, or representatives. The injunction extended to future probate, preventing them from filing claims or contesting the trust. This wasn't vengeance, it was consequence. My son learned too late that inheritance isn't a birthright, it's a privilege built on respect. His wife, though less malicious, still bore accountability for secrecy. Together, their actions proved they couldn't be trusted with authority. The court's ruling wasn't emotional. It was logical, protective, and final. The immigration review concluded next, revealing inconsistencies in their marriage application and intent. While not fraudulent enough for deportation, the marriage was deemed invalid for residency sponsorship. Their application was annulled. My son, once desperate for wealth, now faced the prospect of losing his wife's legal status. Ironically, the union built on convenience and ambition crumbled under scrutiny. The wife didn't fight the annulment. She looked relieved, tired of deception and conflict. She realized survival shouldn't be built on lies. Their marriage, once a tool, became a casualty of truth. The illusion of security dissolved, leaving them both exposed. Own and no longer bound to a marriage of pretense, she chose a different path. She met with social workers and immigration advocates to rebuild her life transparently. She confessed her motives not to gain sympathy but clarity. She began volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping others avoid the desperation she endured. Our conversations grew cautious but civil. I didn't trust her entirely, but I didn't hate her either. She wasn't driven by greed like my son. She was driven by fear. And now she was learning to build without deceit. Her restart wasn't redemption, it was responsibility. My son's downfall wasn't dramatic, it was administrative. With no inheritance and no investors, he faced mounting debts. The court placed him under supervised financial planning, requiring repayment schedules and limiting discretionary spending. He could no longer mask irresponsibility with charm or expected windfalls. His entitlement evaporated. Job applications were met with hesitation, his reputation stained by documented exploitation. For the first time, he had to confront adulthood without shortcuts. The wealth he tried to steal now became a lesson he couldn't ignore. Money doesn't solve character, and character determines survival more than cash ever will. As for me, closure didn't arrive the moment they were punished. It arrived when I redirected the inheritance towards something meaningful, a trauma recovery center in Margaret's name, offering counseling, rehabilitation, and support for accident survivors. It was a tribute to the woman who never sought recognition, and a nod to the crash that nearly ended my life but opened my eyes. I didn't reclaim control through revenge. I reclaimed it through purpose. My son's betrayal no longer defined me. Margaret's love did. The $33 million became more than wealth. It became legacy. And for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully.